It started back in 2018. A young black woman, a student at Smith College, was peacefully minding her own business and eating lunch when a police officer approached her and asked her some questions. The student filmed the encounter and framed it as though it was racial profiling and that it was a horrifying experience to have this officer come up to her, to have someone call the police on her for simply minding her own business. She said that she was approached simply for the crime of being black. But an independent investigation found that it was not true. Apparently, the officer was called for a different matter and politely just inquired as to if this person knew what was going on or if something had happened. And that was really it. But following this, the university went nuts, started making life a living hell as this student complained about the racial profiling. Apparently, several people were ousted from their jobs and things just got really bad at the university for a lot of people. It got particularly contentious. The whole thing was just not true. I would say it was a hoax. But take a look at this glorious sentence from the New York Times. The story highlights the tensions between a student's deeply felt sense of personal truth and facts that are at odds with it. Personal truth? You mean you were wrong and overreacted and ruined people's lives and their experiences at this university? The facts showed that you were incorrect, and that's just your personal truth? My friends, you've heard many stories like this. This is not the only one. There are a ton. And we are seeing the explosive expansion of left-wing racial identitarianism, which allows for this type of exploitation. We've already seen many people launch GoFundMe fundraisers and make hundreds of thousands of dollars alleging some kind of victimization at the hands of the authorities. We are entering an era of woke capital, and I'm sorry, my friends, meritocracy has gone out the window. It ain't even command economy. Now it's victimocracy. Those who are considered to be the most victimized get the power. Let's be real. For a long time now, this country has been deemed to be a plutocracy, ruled by wealthy elites and oligarchs. It was Citibank that said something like this about 10 years ago. I believe it was Citibank. I could be wrong. Well, we know that money is power, and that those who have more money have more influence over the political space. So as people seek to use victimhood as a weapon to gain political power, there are going to be very strange people controlling the reins of our government. These are the people who will go on Twitter and claim that Ted Cruz almost got them murdered. I mean, that was AOC. They use this to raise money for political ads. This is the dawning of a victim economy. And this story is just one example. We've got a couple of things that I want to bring up into this story, the nature of critical race theory, as well as new PSAs from Cartoon Network that many people are talking about, pushing on this idea which expands leftist identitarianism, which would have a government based around race and identity, something that we all fought so hard to end with the 1964 Civil Rights Act. I think it's only going to get worse. But let's get started and read through this story to get the nitty-gritty details on what happened with this hoax. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com and become a member to get access to exclusive members-only episodes. We have a ton of really great podcasts you can't get anywhere else that aren't available on YouTube. And we set up timcast.com specifically so that in the event I inevitably get banned or suppressed, I believe that some of my recent content about tech censorship literally got censored, and that tends to be the case. I will still have this website. One other thing that we're working on is with your membership, the resources I'm getting are going towards supporting this content, but also we're focusing on building open source software to decentralize the net so that censorship won't be an issue in the future. That is a big goal that I have, and I need your support to do it. But seriously, it just helps support my channel, my content, and it allows it to grow. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Let's read this story from the New York Times. Inside a battle over race, class, and power at Smith College, a student said she was racially profiled while eating in a college dorm. An investigation found no evidence of bias, but the incident will not fade away. Why? Let me just put it simply before we read this. Welcome to the tribal era. It doesn't matter who's right or where the facts are. It matters which side can be empowered by this. I'm sorry to say to many of those on the left, but you need to have a wake-up call as to what the Democrats, the establishment, and the corporate politicians, including Republicans, are doing. There was recently a survey done from Echelon Insights. Republicans' biggest concerns are the exact same concerns they've always had: illegal immigration, taxes, support for police, etc. The Democrats are concerned about Trump supporters and white nationalism, things that aren't really policy issues. You don't like what Trump supporters are doing? The Democrats are being roped up by media outrage, but they are being exploited by grifters who will stage hoaxes to manipulate you and exploit your goodwill. This story breaks my heart. This young black woman, she was not profiled. At least the investigation said so. But she's exploiting the goodwill we all have. And we've seen it over and over again, notably with George Floyd and other large protest movements. We all want to protect life to varying degrees, I have to unfortunately say. But we want to respect other people and their civil rights. Everybody does, including Republicans. Anybody who tells you otherwise has not had a real conversation with conservatives. I shouldn't say Republicans because the Republican Party is trash, to be completely honest. But it breaks my heart because I see these leftists, these liberals who really want to fight racism, but they keep getting manipulated. I want only for you to see what's going on, to see that they're grifters who are stealing from you. Here's the story. They say in midsummer of 2018, Umu Kanute, a black student at Smith College, recounted a distressing American tale. She was eating lunch in a dorm lounge when a janitor and campus police officer walked over and asked her what she was doing. The officer, who could have been carrying a lethal weapon, left her near meltdown, Ms. Kanute wrote on Facebook, saying that this encounter continued a year-long pattern of harassment at Smith. Quote, "All I did was be black," Ms. Kanute wrote. "It's outrageous that some people question my being at Smith College and my existence overall as a woman of color." The college's president, Kathleen McCartney, offered profuse apologies and put the janitor on paid leave. This painful incident reminds us of the ongoing legacy of racism and bias, the president wrote, in which people of color are targeted while simply going about the business of their ordinary lives. The New York Times, the Washington Post, and CNN picked up the story of a young female student harassed by white workers. The ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, which took the student's case, said she was profiled for, quote, eating while black. Less attention was paid 3 months later when a law firm hired by Smith College to investigate the episode found no persuasive evidence of bias. Ms. Kanute was determined to have eaten in a deserted dorm that had been closed for the summer. The janitor had been encouraged to notify security if he saw unauthorized people there. The officer, like all campus police, was unarmed. Smith College officials emphasized reconciliation and healing after the incident. In the months to come, they announced a raft of anti-bias training for all staff, a revamped and more sensitive campus police force, and the creation of dormitories, as defended by Ms. Kanute and her ACLU lawyer, set aside for black students and other students of color. Let me stress, segregated dorm rooms emerged from this. Let me ask all of you, and please, if you are someone, look, regular viewer of this content, share this with those in your family and your friends who disagree with you, and let's have a real conversation. I want to ask you something very simple. Would you agree with segregated dorm rooms? Would you agree with discriminating against people based on their race? Just give me a simple yes or no answer to those questions. Now, many of you may have already read the literature and agree with those things and say you may agree with segregation and with discrimination, but a lot of good-natured and good faith and good-willed liberals would say no. It flies in the face of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream. The civil rights protests were fighting to end segregation, to get the Civil Rights Act put in place to guarantee the end of segregation. And we won. The good guys won. We ended that segregation. We have fought so hard to make sure that there are shared spaces and that people have access to everything. It has long been the liberal position that businesses should not discriminate on the basis of certain characteristics, immutable ones. Yet now we're being told that they should have segregated dorm rooms. I'm sorry, I will always oppose that. Now, for obvious reasons, I come from a mixed race background. I know a lot of people say, oh, Tim mentions it all the time. I would say periodically out of the hours and hours of content, maybe a couple times in the past, 6 months or so. But it matters to my family. It matters to me. I don't want to live in a world where my friends are segregated from my other friends. That's nightmarish and weird. And that's what we're getting now with this critical race theory. We're getting it now with these hoaxes. I don't know why these people want segregated dorms. They claim it's because they need safe spaces. In other circumstances, they claim there should not be segregated spaces. It makes no sense, in my opinion, other than to gain power. The New York Times goes on to say, they did not offer any public apology or amends to the workers whose lives were gravely disrupted by the students' accusation. This is a tale of how race, class, and power collided at the elite 145-year-old liberal arts college, where tuition, room, and board topped $78,000 a year, and where the employees who keep the school running often come from working class enclaves beyond the school's elegant wrought iron gates. The story highlights the tensions between a student's deeply felt sense of personal truth and facts that are at odds with it. I could never have afforded this when I was growing up. $78,000 a year was well beyond what my family could afford. Yet I'm repeatedly told that my dad's side of the family are privileged over these individuals, and that this woman was a victim, having gone into an unauthorized portion of the school and was able to pay a $78,000 a year tuition. Tuition. That is the epitome of privilege. I'm sorry, but I'll just give you my thoughts. It makes no sense to me to claim that a homeless white man is privileged and that Oprah Winfrey is not. She's one of the richest people on the planet, and that's an understatement. The New York Times says the tensions come at a time when few in the Smith community feel comfortable publicly questioning liberal orthodoxy on race and identity, and some professors worry the administration is too deferential to its increasingly emboldened students. Quote, "My perception is that you're on the wrong side of issues of identity politics. You're not just mistaken, you're evil," said James Miller, an economics professor at Smith College and a conservative. In an interview, Ms. McCartney said that Ms. Canute's encounter with campus staff was part of a spate of cases of living while black harassment across the nation. There was, she noted, great pressure to act. "We always try to show compassion for everyone involved," she said. President McCartney, like all workers Ms. Canute interacted with on that day, is white. Faculty members, however, pointed to a pattern they say reflects the college's growing timidity in the face of allegations from students, especially around the issues of race and ethnicity. In 2016, students denounced faculty at Smith's social work program as racist after some professors questioned whether admissions standards for the program had been lowered, and this was affecting the quality of the field work. Dennis Meals, one of the professors they decried, left the school not long after. Then in the autumn of 2019, the Religious Studies Department promised a class on Native American religion and spirituality. A full complement of students registered, but well before classes began, a small contingent of Native American students and allies pasted bright red posters on buildings on campus revealing the coarse and harmful, intrusive and disrespectful, and attacking the instructor, who was young, white, and not on a tenure track. He had an academic background in this field and had modeled his course on that of his mentor, who was a well-known professor and member of the Choctaw Nation. The administration declined to challenge the students' protests and had the instructor submit to sessions of radical listening with the protesters. In the end, the Religious Studies Department dropped the class. The atmosphere at Smith is gaining attention nationally, in part because a recent resigned employee of the school, Jodi Shaw, has attracted a fervent YouTube following by decrying what she sees as the college's insistence that its white employees, through anti-bias training, accept the theory of structural racism. Stop. It's called critical race theory, not structural racism. We can talk about institutional racism, which is when an institution has a bias. So universities, for instance, are examples of institutional racism. When they determine that certain individuals should be granted preferential access, that is institutional racism. The institution, of course, having the power to determine which races are allowed in and out of. Now, of course, many on the left say that's not the case, but we've seen racial discrimination from these institutions, so call it whatever you want. There's also historical racism, which is a reference to, look, there was segregation, there was slavery. This resulted in systemic racism, meaning that through these systems, we as individuals may be better off in terms of our morality and understanding. We may reject racist attitudes and behaviors towards other people, but there are still remnants of these policies and laws that exist today. Case in point, redlining and blockbusting, which were discriminatory policies that made it very difficult for black people and for minorities to find a home in certain cities and jurisdictions. The remnants of that resulted in ghettos and enclaves and poverty, which persist to this day. So while individuals may firmly oppose racism, there are still remnants of that exist. And I think we can have conversations around this, but ultimately it seems that the fairest solution to this that we can come up with would be a class-based solution, not a race-based one, because we don't want to recreate the segregation of the past and the policies that resulted in these problems in the first place. But you see what they do over at the New York Times. The New York Times has been heavily accused of being overly woke or engaging in leftist identitarianism. They're trying to conflate these ideas. My friends, let me make it very simple for you. Over on Instagram, I posted this. It is an image from a Cartoon Network PSA for children. It says, see color, be anti-racist. Most people see the phrase anti-racist and they assume it means don't be racist. I'm sorry, that's not true. I have a quote for you from a prominent anti-racist explaining what anti-racism is. In this quote from Ibram X. Kendi, he says, "The defining question is whether the discrimination is creating equity or inequity. If discrimination is creating equity, then it is anti-racist. If discrimination is creating inequity, then it is racist. The only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination." This is a quote from a prominent anti-racist author saying that you must discriminate against people based on their race in order to create favorable outcomes. Most people on the left would not agree with that. They would argue that discrimination is wrong. I mean, coming from my family who fought so hard against discrimination, they all certainly would think that discrimination is wrong, and they taught me to believe as such, and I carry that with me. So what does it mean now when you have a cartoon for children telling people to see color and be anti-racist? At its core, this does have a very large overlap with, say, the alt-right. Now, obviously not identically, there's very big differences, but the general idea is that these critical race theorists want to trigger what is known as a racial awakening. They want people to recognize the color of everyone else so they can vote on policies based on that color. Let me ask you something very simple. Very simple. What race is the majority of this country? Obviously, white people. Who will most likely be impacted by PSAs saying to see color, to judge people based on their race? White people. And if people are told to make decisions based on the color of their skin and the color of other people's skin, which do you think this group is going to, which race will predominantly benefit from voting based on race? Once again, it is white people. This is why there are many right-wing identitarians and white identitarians that support and agree with a lot of this ideology. And it's why true activist individuals who really care about social justice and equality and legitimate equity would say this is wrong and it's extremely dangerous. Now, maybe there's just a bunch of people who don't understand what it means when you have these schools and you have these policies in critical race theory. They genuinely think they're doing the right thing. Hopefully that explainer I just gave you breaks down why what you're doing is wrong. I can't tell you how many times I've had arguments with wealthy white progressives who tell me how I'm supposed to live my life when my family literally experienced segregation and anti-miscegenation laws. I mean, these things were not good for my family. So they fought to get it shut down. And now, once again, it is the white progressive, I suppose, that is saying we should go back to those ways. I'm sorry. I'm not a fan of that. I absolutely reject that. But that's what's happening. And it's destroying people's lives. And so long as there are cowards who refuse to stand up and say no, it'll only get worse. They say the path to hell is paved with good intentions. And I think that's where we're headed. It's reactionary. Reactionary is a phrase that typically means, it's a reference to the French Revolution. Those who opposed the revolution were reactionary, reacting to those who wanted to change. Well, I would dare say it is the history of this nation to be identitarian. The United States for the longest time had many racial covenants, racial ideology, and policies. We had slavery, we had segregation, we had Jim Crow, we had race-based law. It is only in the short term that we changed these things. That with the Civil Rights Act and with Loving v. Virginia, with the banning of redlining and blockbusting, only in the 80s did we start to say, it's time to change the structure of this nation. And we did. It was a revolution. Still to this day, many countries around the world have race-based policies. Try becoming a citizen of Japan. See what happens as someone who isn't Japanese. It's true for many other countries as well. The United States is unique in this regard, and so are many European nations. The critical race theorists and these far leftists who are creating segregated dorms are trying to revert the United States back to what it used to be. That's reactionary. They oppose the radical change of equality and recognizing people as people and not based on their race. But once again, they will say you must see color. In this PSA, there is a little black girl and a little white girl. And the little black girl says that her experience with anti-black racism is different from the experiences of other races. And the little white girl says that it matters that she's white too. Now, many on the left will tell you what the white girl is saying is that she's talking about white privilege. That's fine, okay? I understand the concept. But let me just once again state what I feel has always been obvious. What is the majority race in this country? White. Who is most likely going to vote on racial lines if they start having a racial awakening, seeing color? White people, because there's more of them. It's just general arithmetic. And do you think they'll vote in favor of their own race or against their own race? I'm sorry. While there may be many liberals with an outgroup preference, the outgroup preference is only around, I believe, 10 or so percent. If you were actually able to, as you know, make white people see color, they're going to start voting for their own interests, which is why the alt-right supports much of the same ideology as Black Lives Matter, not identically, of course, and critical race theorists. It's why both the left, this woman, is an identitarian, as well as the alt-right. They're quite literally identitarians. Back at the New York Times, they say, quote, "Stop demanding that I admit to white privilege and work on my so-called implicit bias as a condition of my continued employment." Miss Shaw, who is also a 1993 graduate of Smith, who worked in the residential life department, said in one of her videos, after months of clashing with the administration, Miss Shaw resigned last week and appears likely to sue the school, calling it a racially hostile workplace. Her claims drew headlines from Fox News to Rolling Stone this week. Alumni, faculty, and students continue to debate the issue. All of this arose from the events of July 31st, 2018. This individual, Jodi, I believe it's Jodi Shaw, Smith College, Jodi Shaw, has launched a GoFundMe, Help Jodi Shaw with Legal and Living Expenses. She has now raised $240,000. This is a culture war. People are fighting for resources. And you can see one individual gave $5,000 to this woman. Interestingly, at some point, GoFundMe froze the donations to investigate the claims and statements made by Jodi Shaw. As we've seen over and over again, GoFundMe has no problem banning anyone who goes against their leftist orthodoxy. However, in Jodi Shaw's case, GoFundMe has released the hold on my account. Over at GoFundMe, Shaw says, "Since going public with my own story of being trapped in a hostile work environment, I have heard from people, both my own former colleagues and others, who are in similar situations but cannot afford to take action. With any money I raise in excess of $150,000, I would like to help others exercise their right to be free from a hostile work environment. The purpose of this cause is to raise money for the legal and living, mortgage, rent, food, transportation, childcare, expenses of myself and others who were forced to leave their jobs due to a hostile work environment and or would like to take legal action but cannot do so due to a lack of financial resources. The people who have come to me for support cannot afford to have their identities exposed while still employed. It is precisely this climate of fear that I am seeking to combat with my lawsuit. But revealing the identities of other individuals trapped in hostile work environments would compromise their safety and security." Well, listen, some people would say it's easy for me to speak up because I run my own business. And that is not true. I mean, it's certainly true that it's easier for me to speak up, fine. But I spoke up when I worked for ABC News joint venture with Univision. They were a completely woke environment. I was explicitly told that I could not participate in a high-profile event because I was too white, even though I actually have a mixed race background. They don't respect Asians, and they don't respect, white backgrounds. And I was told by this company, again, I could not participate. Sorry. And I was actually told by one of the executives, it's super racist, I know. Now, what could I do? File a lawsuit? That's not necessarily who I am. Maybe I should have. No, I just spoke out, left, and I've told people about this. I tried breaking my contract, which they wouldn't let me do. And I said, well, you know what? It's called golden handcuffs. They give you a ton of money and they make it so you can't really do much. They allowed me to basically work on my own YouTube channel. And so I said, they're still paying me. They're discriminating against me based on my race and my appearance. I mean, it had nothing to do with the fact that with the fact of being white, because by legal accounts, I qualify as other on these documents because I am not solely one race, but it was appearance. That's exactly what Dr. Martin Luther King said I don't want to happen. But here it is in full swing. I'm worried about the future because, Seeing Cartoon Network come out and say to children, see color. I simply ask people, do you agree with the dream of Dr. King? That one day his children will be judged on the content of their character and not the color of their skin. But we now live in a world where the left is advocating for judging people based on the color of their skin. Now, I've argued with many people on the left about this, and they've said it's not at odds. You can recognize someone's race and their experiences, but not judge them because of it. And I say, no, you literally can't. When you claim that there's white privilege and that it's inherent and supersedes all other issues, you would look. Let's say you took a white man and a black man and you dressed them in fine clothing. You would judge them on what you think their status is by their appearance, the color of their skin. We can't do that. I got to be honest. You can learn more about someone based on their shoes than their skin color. And that's a fact. They used to teach us this in fundraising and sales. Look at someone's shoes. They'll tell you a lot more than anything having to do with any other characteristic. People with nice shoes, you can probably assume they can afford to get nice shoes. Class issues are paramount. Well, here we go. All day I've been talking to people about these issues, Cartoon Network, for instance, these PSAs. And let's be real. Institutions are wholly embracing neo-racist ideology. When they say it's anti-racist, there's a reason why they're calling it anti-racism and not saying don't be racist. Because to tell someone not to be racist, we typically associate that with not discriminating against somebody based on their race. But as I showed you, some of the most prominent authors, one of the most prominent author, Ibram X. Kendi, who actually has some of the best-selling books, has straight up said that the only remedy is discrimination. I'd like you to ask your friends and family who don't know about this stuff. Very, very simply say, I don't want to, start anything. We're not here to have a crazy argument. Just I'm curious, do you support discriminating against people based on race? And when they invariably say no, as most will, just show them this book from Ibram X. Kendi and this quote, where he says, you must. He says, quote, racial, Ibram, I don't even want to read this. Ibram X. Kendi says, racial discrimination is not inherently racist. It is. Racism being traditionally defined as positive or negative discrimination based on race. I remember for a long time, they used to say there was positive racism. And what they meant was when you claim that Asians are good at math, that was it was racism. Because it's not true. It's a stereotype, but it was a positive one. You were saying good things about them, but it was still wrong to do because you shouldn't judge people based on their race. I agree. I know many Asians who are not good at math. I knew a kid growing up who was Asian and he was not particularly a smart guy. And I knew some Asians who were geniuses because guess what? The Asian had nothing to do with it. It has to do with your access to education, your access to medical treatment, your access to information. Whether or not you have two parents is another big factor in this. Yet they keep trying to change the conversation and make the end all be all race. So I'll tell you what I think. You have this woman who writes this book, Robin DiAngelo, telling people that she is a racist and she knows it and that you should listen to what she has to say. Many organizations hire this woman and I don't know why. Why would you take a white woman who claims to be racist and wealthy and tell her to preach to people her ideology? It makes no sense. I've already laid out who's going to benefit the most from these policies. In my opinion, it's going to be white people. Because once they start voting based on race, they're going to start voting for their own race. I don't know what these leftists think is going to happen. It's not what's going to happen. It's not going to happen the way they think it is. It is white progressives who are pushing these policies. Maybe they're misguided, or maybe they're being manipulated by overt white supremacists who are using this as a Trojan horse to enact policies that fly in the face of the civil rights era movement and laws. And it's going to keep happening. They're going to change language, they're going to make these arguments, and they're going to stop anyone from talking about it. So let me just make one point clear as we sign off on this story. When you have a white woman tell you she's a racist, please don't listen to her. Why would you take your advice from racists? That's what they're doing. They're telling you they are racist and they want you to be like them. When they call it anti-racism, they don't mean non-racist. They mean the same thing, just with a different word. It's unfortunate that a lot of people don't want to believe it. They would claim that I have some kind of agenda. So let me make one thing additionally clear. In an argument I had earlier, someone tried claiming that I actually supported these ideas because simply talking about my heritage was supportive of some kind of race-based policy. No. I want to make sure you understand this. Why do people say, haha, Tim Pool's mixed race? Maybe it's because if any identitarian faction gains the ability to pass laws based on race, I will lose everything. I refuse to be a second-class citizen. I refuse to have them say, based on any race, you're going to face some detrimental policy, because that just means my family goes back to being second-class citizens. I won't accept that. I will resist it, whether it comes from the left or the right. Unfortunately, it looks like the left is winning this fight. That's a reality. Smith College is still having these conversations. People's lives are still adversely affected. I can say it's a good thing that Jodi Shaw has raised nearly $240,000. Those are resources going towards someone who's fighting against this with respect. And hopefully, in the end, the true social justice activists, the true ones who want real equality among people, hopefully they win. But it'll only happen if you speak up and you share videos like this to help educate people to what's really going on. Next segment's coming up tonight at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastIRL. It's a live show. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.